HSU, where healing, teaching, and discovery come together.
Good evening, I'm Jim Lehrer. On the NewsHour tonight, Ray Suarez runs a discussion about children who commit murder and other serious crimes. Then some presidential politics with snapshots from the Bush and McCain campaigns, followed by analysis by Mark Shields and Paul Gigot. And finally, a conversation about Chechnya with Boston Globe Moscow correspondent David Filippov. It all follows a summary of the news this Friday.
It took millions of years to create the world's oil supply and 150 years to deplete it. Who is helping to cut the world's need for oil with renewable energy sources?
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This program was also made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
The U.S. Supreme Court set the stage today for major rulings on abortion and on gay rights. The court agreed to hear a case on whether states may ban the procedure that opponents call partial birth abortions. A Nebraska law made the procedure a crime, but a federal appeals court struck it down. The justices will also determine whether the Boy Scouts can exclude homosexuals as troop leaders. That case is from New Jersey. Thousands of Cuban mothers took to the streets of Havana today. They demanded the return of 6-year-old Elion Gonzalez to his father. The boy has been living with relatives in Miami since his mother died at sea, trying to bring him to the United States. Last night on ABC's Nightline, his father said he'd like to take a rifle and get rid of people keeping his son in America. But he said there's no point in going to Miami to argue his case. He spoke through an interpreter.
Do you think that if I go there, they will give him to me? They won't. They will involve me in this business of theirs, of complicating this more every day. They simply have to return him to me.
The U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Services ruled the boy should be returned to Cuba. His Miami relatives now plan to challenge that ruling next week in federal court. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed up 140 points at 11,722, another record high. The NASDAQ was up 107 at 4,064. Stocks gained partly on news that consumer prices rose less than expected in December. The Labor Department said the increase was just 0.2%. Consumer inflation for all of '99 was the lowest since the mid-1960s, excluding energy and food. The markets also gained despite hints from Federal Reserve Chairman Greenspan that interest rates might be raised again. He spoke at a dinner last night in New York.
Not only is the expansion reaching record length, but it is doing so with far stronger than expected economic growth. Indeed, our goal in responding to the complexity of current economic forces is to extend the expansion by containing its imbalances and avoiding the very recession that would complete a business cycle.
The Fed's next meeting is February 2nd. Overseas today, Russia lifted restrictions that blocked most Chechen males from leaving or entering the republic. The rules had brought criticism from Western governments and human rights groups. We have this report from Louise Bates of Associated Press Television News.
A bus waits at Ingushetia's border with Chechnya. 24 hours ago, any Chechen males inside between the ages of 10 and 60 would be turned back by Russian forces trying to clamp down on Chechen fighters masquerading as refugees. Now they can join the Russian military vehicles streaming into their homeland. That's good news for some of the 180,000 Chechen refugees stranded in the neighboring republic. I'm glad the order to detain Chechen men is being lifted, this man said. Now I can see my wife and children. Russia says more than 80,000 of the 250,000 people who fled to Ingushetia have returned home. Those who make it back face a country still in turmoil. In the recently bombed settlement of Alkan-Yurt near Grozny, Refugees have returned to find their villages in ruins. The battle for this former rebel stronghold was one of the toughest of Russia's military campaign.
We'll have more on Chechnya later in the program tonight. The White House said today it was not out to meddle in the TV network's creative freedom. Spokesman Joe Lockhart responded to reports that President Clinton's Drug Policy Office consulted on scripts for primetime shows. It also offered financial incentives for including anti-drug messages. The shows included ER and Beverly Hills 90210, among others. Lockhart said the arrangement was proper and innovative.
There is a real benefit to getting the message out. There is no sense here of the government playing a role of what you can say and what you can't say. It was a sense of partnership between the government that wants to get an anti-drug message out, and I think some businesses that think it's in their interest to get an anti-drug message out.
The heads of several studios said they hadn't known the networks were working with the government to add anti-drug messages to programs. The president of Regency Television called the practice appalling. The company produces the shows Malcolm in the Middle and Roswell. President Clinton today welcomed word of a possible compromise on providing a drug benefit under Medicare. A prescription drug industry group said they are now willing to consider drug coverage legislation without a comprehensive Medicare overhaul. Before, they had argued it would lead to government price setting. The president called the company's change of heart a good first step. Mr. Clinton also announced an agreement today to protect whistleblowers in the airline industry. It gives pilots and other aviation workers immunity for reporting errors that could cause accidents. The agreement follows more than a year of talks involving airlines, pilots, and the government. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to how to handle children who commit serious crimes, Bush and McCain campaign snapshots, Shields and Gigot, and a foreign correspondence about Chechnya. Kids in crime, and to Ray Suarez.
Let there be no misunderstanding.
This sentence was awaited by Americans on all sides of the juvenile justice debates.
Therefore, this court orders that Nathaniel J. Abraham be placed within the juvenile justice system and committed to FIA for placement at boys training school.
After his 21st birthday, Nathaniel Abraham will be a free man. Under this sentence, he won't serve time with adults.
The record should indicate the court has received a note from the jury that they have reached a verdict.
Last November, 13-year-old Nathaniel Abraham became the youngest person ever convicted of murder in the United States. He was the first minor tried under Michigan's 3-year-old juvenile justice law, which allows juveniles to be charged and sentenced as adults. 2 years earlier, on October 29, 1997, Abraham came here to the woods near a convenience store in Pontiac, Michigan. With a borrowed rifle, he shot a stranger, Ronnie Green, in the head, killing him.
Raise your right hand, please. Right hand.
In his early court appearances, the then 11-year-old Abraham looked and sounded like an ordinary kid. At 4'9", he was so small that witnesses say his feet dangled above the floor when he sat in the witness chair.
This is a working Remington nylon 66 .22 caliber rifle. He knew that it worked. He knew how to use it.
Prosecutors argued that Abraham intended to kill Green. The boy had had numerous run-ins with police and had been accused of assault, burglary, and robbery.
All of us know if we give a child like Nate a gun, they will shoot it.
The defense, led by Jeffrey Feiger, who had represented Dr. Jack Kevorkian, contended Abraham had been shooting at the trees and was not guilty of murder.
Were you in a special education class?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Abraham's attorneys said Nathaniel was mildly retarded with the reasoning ability of a 6-year-old and therefore could not have planned and carried out the crime. Abraham was acquitted of the 4 original charges, including first-degree murder, assault, and 2 firearms charges. He was convicted of second-degree murder. Under Michigan law, a first-degree murder conviction would have meant a life sentence without parole. Judge Eugene Moore rejected a delayed sentence while acknowledging it would be less controversial. He said the looming deadline of this young killer's 21st birthday will focus the system on the need for effective rehab.
If we commit ourselves to this, we can ensure our safety now and in the future. The safety net of a delayed sentence removes too much of the urgency. We can't continue to see incarceration in a prison as a long-term solution. The danger is that we won't take rehabilitation seriously if we know we can utilize prison in the future. To sentence juveniles to adult prison is ignoring the possibility that we are creating a more dangerous criminal by housing juveniles with hardened adults.
Finally, the judge addressed the 13-year-old directly.
Do you begin to understand what you have done? You clearly need to put yourself in another person's shoes. You learn to need to think before you act. You need to look at the consequences of your behavior for yourself and for others. You have probably done the worst thing that can be done, and that is to kill another human being. You are going to have to come to terms with this before you can begin to grow as a person and develop the potential that all children possess. In the long run, you will best have your own needs met by concerning yourself with the needs of others.
Now, two perspectives on juveniles and the adult criminal justice system. Linda Collier is a practicing attorney and professor of criminal justice at Cabrini College, and James Fox is a criminologist and the Lippman Family Professor of Criminal Justice at Northeastern University. Linda Collier, your reaction to the verdict?
Well, I think the judge missed a prime opportunity to do some good. He had an opportunity to transform this young man from a bad situation into a better situation. And he's actually giving some trust to a system that's been derelict in its duties for so very long to improve itself within 8 years. I don't have that kind of confidence, and I think that he should have given him a blended sentence.
James Fox, your reaction?
Well, I was surprised by the sentence, pleasantly surprised. This was a bold move by the judge, to be sure, working against the trend in America of sending more and more kids into the adult system. They don't belong there most of the time. They may look like adults, they may act like adults, they may even shoot like adults, but they think like children, and we shouldn't forget that fact. I, too, had expected a blended sentence. That is, that he would have been sentenced to a juvenile facility until the age of 18 through 21, and then be evaluated thereafter to determine if he needed more time in adult prison. That's what the prosecution was pushing for. However, when we look at 10 years for second-degree murder, nationally, adults average 11.5 years for second-degree murder. This is not just a slap on the wrist. It's the appropriate sentence, given the crime.
Linda Collier, this was mentioned in the report that this was not young Nathaniel's first run-in with the law, but he had never been arrested, processed, or punished in the juvenile system before. In his sentencing statement, the judge said the people of Michigan had failed Nathaniel Abraham.
Exactly. I do agree with that. As I said, our criminal justice system has really been derelict in its duties for setting up a system where young men have to answer and be accountable. I think that the judge could have transformed him by putting him into a blended sentence, giving us the opportunity, and I agree with Mr. Fox, that the system right now as it is situated, the old system, the adult system, would not be able to rehabilitate this young man. And I'm not calling for that, but I am calling for something better, something different. Even a boot camp situation would have been better than what the judge has given him in detention.
James Fox, one of the Michigan legislators who helped get this new law passed, said that when you play the numbers game, you always lose. If you set it at 15, somebody will bring you a case involving a 14-year-old. If you set it at 14, someone will bring you a case involving a 13-year-old. What do we know about the age of responsibility?
Well, we do know, and there's even some neurological evidence, that the portion of the brain that controls reasoning ability does not develop until late adolescence or maybe even early adulthood. 11-year-olds simply do not have the capacity to think things through. Yes, I do believe, despite his limited reasoning power and perhaps the possibility he was retarded mildly, I do believe he knew what he was doing. But kids simply don't have the same ability to sort of think things through the way that adults can. We need to punish juvenile offenders and punish juvenile murderers, but they're not the same as adults, and they shouldn't be treated the same as adults. We need a lesser degree of criminal responsibility. Let's not forget that. What we need to do is to go back to what we did before. Let juvenile court judges decide which kids are so beyond the possibility of rehabilitation that they should be tried as adults. Most kids can be rehabilitated if we try, and they should be kept in the juvenile system. If you want to make the juvenile system more punitive, fine, but just don't throw it away. Let's not pretend that 11, 12, 13-year-olds are adults. They're not.
Linda Collier, can we ever very accurately set that number somewhere between 11 and 21?
Oh, I think we would honestly be arbitrary if we did try to set a certain number. I think that what we need to do at this point is to look at the system, see what works. It's been proven by all the sociology persons that if you have attachments to certain institutions, you have religion in your life, you have school in your life, you have family in your life, you have people who are there encouraging you to do good and be successful, then you have a recipe for success, for bringing juveniles around and for making sure that they don't engage in criminal activity. I think with those things lacking in Nathaniel Abraham's life, I don't think that we're going to come out 8 years from now and say, okay, this child has been rehabilitated, let's just throw him back into society and be satisfied with the results. We need to give him something more.
But his own mother had asked local authorities about having him declared an incorrigible. She was clearly looking for help. Do we have to also set our focus wider than just an individual suspect and their terrible crime, looking at other places in the system?
Oh, sure. I think that there need to be some preventive measures. I don't think that we need to wait until somebody commits such a heinous crime and then gets the criminal justice system involved. I think it's been proven time and time again, even with the case of New Jersey, where the kid had killed 11-year-old or 13-year-old Eddie Warner, that the criminal justice system needed to be involved long before that child was murdered. But we don't have the mechanisms in place to address those kinds of problems. And we need to put those mechanisms in place, and we need to be able to monitor our children to make sure that they get what they need to succeed.
James Fox?
What we really need to do is to build the child rather than try to rebuild the teenager.
That's true.
We do know that prehabilitation works better than rehabilitation.
That's right.
If you look at some of the bills that are going through the Congress and in many state legislatures, prevention and punishment is out of whack. There's been so much more emphasis on punishment. After all, it's politically expedient position to take. Yet we know that prevention does work. It may not always be popular politically, but it does work. We need to invest more money in prevention and save punishment for the sad cases where the system fails.
But aren't sentences, James Fox, supposed to work on more than one level, both responding to the individual crime and the individual defendant, and sending a message to the wider community about the judgment of the court, about the seriousness of the crime, and reassuring people that they take crime seriously?
Well, of course, to the family of Ronnie Green, it doesn't matter at all whether the person who pulled the trigger was 11 or 41. He's still dead, and we have to understand that and empathize with the family, that the age of the perpetrator makes no difference. Yet we also, as a society, have to take the view, what kind of perpetrator are we talking about? 11-year-olds are not the same as 41-year-olds in terms of their capacity to reason things through. As far as deterrence, sending a message, we do know that long prison sentences given to juveniles do not deter other juveniles. Kids don't think about consequences for themselves, much less for their victims. Many of these kids don't perceive that they're going to live past the age of 21 anyway, so why worry about long-term prison sentence? Deterrence may work with adults. It doesn't really work with kids. The best that we can do is really to invest much more money in prevention programs, prevention strategies for kids, and in the cases where kids do commit horrible, horrendous crimes, take it on a case-by-case basis. Decide which kids have culpability, full culpability, and should be tried as an adult because of their long criminal record, that they've proven that they're not rehabilitatable, versus other kids who can be turned around and should be kept in the juvenile system. I think we should have discretion in the hands of judges the way we used to, and not allow legislators to take all the discretion away and decide ahead of time which categories of kids, which categories of crime are going to be sent into the adult court.
Linda Collier, the judge in this case, had wide discretion, even with the new Michigan law.
Exactly. That's why I said I think he missed his opportunity. Trying Nathaniel Abraham in adult court gave him the opportunity to actually give him an elongated sentence. Juvenile court, of course, the sentence is going to be very brief. And that's exactly what the judge did. He basically acted as though he was trying a juvenile case, and juvenile court gave him a very brief sentence of 8 years, something that doesn't make him truly accountable, in my opinion, since he did take someone else's life.
But do you agree with James Fox that deterrence doesn't work with juveniles?
Sometimes deterrence doesn't work, Ray, with adults, and I recognize that. But I do think preventive measures, as I alluded to before, with making certain institutions responsible for children's behavior, religion, the family and the schools and institutions of that sort, I think that would help. It would at least prevent some of the more heinous crimes if we make a child feel invested in his community, as though he is losing something or as though he is taking something away. I don't think Nathaniel felt as though he took anything away from anybody, whether it was a robbery or a murder or whatever. I think he basically dismissed the heinousness of his crime.
That's because he's 11. 3 years ago, the state legislature in Michigan opened the floodgates, said, okay, you can be tried as an adult no matter how young you are. And in 1999, when the decision was made whether to send Nathaniel to adult court or juvenile court, that may have been where the mistake was made, to treat him as an adult.
Oh, wow.
What the judge did in this case, I think, was to rectify the mistake made when he was charged in adult court rather than juvenile court. He's 11 years old.
But
he belongs in juvenile court, and he deserves to receive a juvenile sentence.
But James, he has a mental capacity of a six-year-old.
Yeah.
In 8 years, he'll only have the mental capacity of perhaps an 11-year-old. What's going to happen then? We're not going to go back and reevaluate him. We're just going to basically wash our hands, throw him back into the system, and whatever crime happens, happens. But we're done. Well, and that's unfortunate, because I don't think we need to be done. I think this kid deserves our interest. He deserves our attention, and we should stick with him and try to help him transform a very bad situation into a better one.
Linda Collier, James Fox, thank you both for being with us.
You're welcome. Thanks, Ray.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, McCain and Bush campaign snapshots, Shields and Gigot, and a foreign correspondence about Chechnya. Now, two snapshots from the presidential campaigns. We heard from the Democratic candidates last night. Tonight, it's the two Republican frontrunners, both from campaign stops in New Hampshire, where the first presidential primary is now just 2.5 weeks away. On Wednesday, Senator John McCain held a town meeting at a school in Dublin, New Hampshire.
Now I want to just talk for a minute about what our young people will view as a mundane issue. Please feel free to take a nap while I'm talking if you so choose. And that's the issue of what we're going to do with this surplus. As you know, for the first time since the Eisenhower administration, we now are running a budget surplus, which is your money, your tax dollars. And the question has arisen, of course, as to how we should handle this, quote, surplus. Some want to use the entire surplus in tax cuts, use the entire surplus for tax cuts. I want to use some of it for tax cuts. I want to also eliminate corporate welfare and wasteful spending and give tax cuts to middle-income and lower-income Americans. My friends, there's recent studies, one by the Department of Commerce, that says there's a growing gap between the haves and the have-nots in America, that the very rich are getting richer faster than those who are further down. I believe that maybe we ought to do everything we can to let those have-nots get a break, a tax break, an incentive, and training so that they can also. I don't think it's important right now to give 37% of any tax cut to the top 1% of the wealthiest people in America. I think we're aware that there's a ticking time bomb out there called Social Security. There was a recent poll that showed that more young Americans believe that Elvis is alive than believe that they'll ever see a Social Security check. That's, you know, at least Elvis has been spotted several places. Don't you think that we owe these young kids? Don't you think we should make Social Security solvent for them as well as those who are the present beneficiaries? I think we ought to repeal the marriage penalty. Nobody should pay more taxes because they get married. I think we should repeal the earnings test that penalizes people over age 65 who want to work. I think that we should lift as many Americans as we can into the 15% tax bracket. Under the proposal I have, and I hope you'll examine it, we put 85% of American taxpayers today in the 15% tax bracket or no taxes at all. I want to make this tax flat from the bottom up. I thank you very much for being here today. I'm appreciative of it, and I'd like to begin with the first question or comment that you might have.
Could you please explain your position on abortion?
I'd like to, yes. Thank you for your question. I am pro-life, and that is my 17-year voting record, and I hold that position, as does my party. And I hold it based on the belief that life begins at conception. But I'm very disturbed, as most Americans are, about the polarization that has existed and continues on this issue. I am committed to beginning a dialogue between pro-life and pro-choice Americans to work in a productive fashion on issues that we share common goals and we can work together on to make for a better nation and better families. Yes, sir, in the back.
I spent some time over in Europe and Asia before I retired this last summer, and the people I talked to were very negative about the strength of the United States in foreign affairs. And I hate to say so, it was because of the lack of trust and truthfulness of our government. Could you address how you would correct those affairs other than the fact that you have integrity?
Obviously, the first obligation of the President of the United States is as Commander-in-Chief and ensure the security of our nation. That's our first and most important responsibility. This administration has conducted a feckless, photo-op foreign policy for which we may have to pay a very heavy price in American blood and treasure. You look all around the world, with the notable exceptions of Northern Ireland and the Middle East peace process, where the President and the administration deserves credit, and you see potential trouble spots or existing trouble spots that could threaten our security.
Hi. I was wondering what your support was for homosexuality and that in general and also in the military.
I thank you. I do not believe in discrimination of any kind in America. I think it's wrong. I think that we should eliminate it where it exists, and all Americans are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and I strongly oppose any discrimination. I support the so-called don't ask, don't tell policy in the military. The architects of that policy were people who I respect as much as anyone I've ever known, including General Colin Powell. The policy is working. There have been problems with it, and there will continue to be problems with personnel policies which touch on such sensitive and difficult issues as this one. But I will support the policy. And if there's a need for review of this policy, my friends, which there is a need for review of every personnel policy from time to time, I would like to do that in the far less partisan and highly charged atmosphere of a political campaign.
Yesterday, Governor George W. Bush had a town meeting in Londonderry, New Hampshire.
We're in a tax debate here in this state and around the country. And let me explain my position as clearly as I can. First, unspent surpluses in Washington, D.C. will be spent. You mark my words, you leave money sitting around the table in Washington, Washington politicians will spend it. Now, I believe there's enough money. If you lockbox the payroll taxes, there is $2 trillion to make sure the Social Security system is safe and secure. $2 trillion. I intend to lockbox the payroll taxes and spend them only on what they're supposed to be spent on, and that's Social Security. By the way, and I intend to work with both Republicans and Democrats to allow younger workers, if they so choose, to manage their own personal savings accounts, to make sure the Social Security exists tomorrow as well. There's a baseline of a budget that I projected that meets basic needs. and there's money left over. And the fundamental question is, what do we do with it? Do we keep it in Washington to expand the reach of the federal government, or do we give it back to the taxpayers? I believe we ought to give it back to the taxpayers. I believe we ought to have a tax cut in America, a tax cut that does two things. A tax cut that encourages economic growth, and a tax cut that addresses some unfairness in the tax code. My plan that I've laid out cuts taxes on everybody who pays taxes in America. I believe it's important to cut the marginal rates. I subscribe to the theory that by cutting marginal rates, it will enhance productivity and growth in America. But my plan also addresses the fairness issue. The death tax is unfair, and I intend to work to eliminate it. The marriage penalty needs to be mitigated. It's unfair. The earnings test on Social Security recipients is unfair, and we've got to get rid of the earnings test. For some who don't understand what that means, it means if you worked all your life and earned your Social Security, and you decide you want to continue to work, you get penalized on your benefits, the benefits you've earned. That's not right. That's not fair, and that's counterproductive. Yes, ma'am?
Our health care system is a mess. We have 45 million people with no health insurance. Most of those people are working families. We have HMOs deserting people and seniors who can't afford drugs. Will you promise me right here and now that you will put this at the top of your agenda in your speeches and the debates, and please swear to me you will make health care right up at the top of your agenda?
Well, I appreciate that. It's a very important issue. Let me talk about the uninsured real quickly. Some of the uninsured are working uninsured, and some of the uninsured are able-bodied folks who just don't want to buy insurance. And that's why we ought to have medical savings accounts available. Because what medical savings accounts will do is provide an economic incentive for people to put money aside for their health needs when they get older in life. But let me talk about the working uninsured, because it is a big problem. I agree with you. And it's an important problem. What we need to do in our society is to encourage states to design basic catastrophic health care plans for people that are affordable, that become affordable, and then works with programs like the CHIPS programs, if you're a single mom with children, to be able to supplement the employer's payment so that people can't afford a plan. Let me tell you what I'm afraid of in the health care debate. I'm afraid of a plan that encourages the nationalization of health care. I think that would be the wrong approach. Yes, ma'am.
What do you think America's role in the world community should be?
I think a president must explain to the American people what is in our national strategic interests. Our hemisphere is in our national strategic interests. It's in our interest to have a hemisphere that's a free trading hemisphere and a peaceful hemisphere. And therefore, if I'm the president, I'm going to ask the Congress for fast-track negotiating authority to negotiate market agreements, trade agreements, with people in Central and South America. It's to our nation's advantage to do that. It's in our national strategic interest to protect our friend and promote the peace in the Middle East, our friend Israel, and our other Arab friends, to promote peace. The only lasting peace agreement, though, will be one which the parties themselves agree upon without the United States imposing a peace settlement. The Far East is another area of strategic interest. We must redefine our relationship with China from one of strategic partner to competitor. But competitors can find areas of agreement. One area where I think we ought to have agreement is on trade. I think it's to our nation's best interest to trade with China. I know it's in the best interest of farmers to trade with China and entrepreneurs to trade with China. It's also, by the way, in our interest to trade with China to support a growing entrepreneurial class. Entrepreneurship is freedom. When people get a taste of the marketplace, they will demand freedom and democracy. I do not support what China's done with religious freedoms in its country. But I believe if we turn our back on China, China could easily become more repressive. I'm also going to make it clear to China, though, that our alliances in the Far East are important to us. Our alliances with Japan and South Korea, and we must develop a theater-based anti-ballistic missile system for that part of the world as well.
The 6 Republican candidates will debate in Iowa tomorrow night. And to some Friday night political analysis by Shields and Gigot, syndicated columnist Mark Shields, Wall Street Journal columnist Paul Gigot. First on McCain and Bush, both of you have spent time with their both of their campaigns. Our snapshots, Paul, were those good examples of the two men at work?
I think they were, and I think particularly on the issue of taxes, which has emerged as a central dividing line between the two of them, Jim. You saw the nub of the argument there. And it's a classic Republican argument that's gone back 30, 40 years between the tax-cutting wing and kind of the fiscal uprightness wing, the balanced budget wing. Now it's the debt reduction wing. It's taken place in 1980 between Reagan and George Bush Sr., who was kind of in the McCain camp at that time. You saw it in 1988 with Bob Dole in the austerity wing versus George Bush, who then had become a tax cutter and took the tax pledge. And now you're seeing it replayed again. Mm-hmm. Every time in the last 20 years that this debate has taken place within the Republican Party at the presidential level, the tax cutter has won. And what's fascinating about this is that John McCain is saying, I can, because of the prosperity we're having, I can maybe win this argument this time by saying Social Security and debt reduction trump tax cuts. If it happens, it'll be the first time in an awful long time within the Republican Party, but that's the gamble he's making.
Mark, do you see the tax issue the same way Paul does, that it is really the defining one between these two men?
I really don't, Jim, but can I just say about the excerpts we just saw, those were testimony to this campaign and John McCain's influence upon it. I mean, John McCain made this campaign a campaign of town meetings. Everybody has to do town meetings now. Governor Bush, who's a fine candidate and absolutely marvelous with people, would prefer to be in a closely choreographed, scripted studio, as would most candidates. But McCain, out of necessity, made this his virtue. And now every candidate in both parties, I mean, Al Gore can't turn around without having another town meeting. And it's John McCain's influence, and it's been, the amazing thing is that John McCain leapfrogged over everybody else in the Republican race, except George W. Bush, solely on the basis of this approach. Without spending a nickel on radio or TV advertising of any kind, he moved into the mid-20s in all the polls in New Hampshire after millions of it spent by the others. As far as the tax thing is concerned...
Hold on 1 minute. Let me just see if Paul agrees on this, on the town meeting thing, and that McCain has led the way here, just as a campaign technique.
I think New Hampshire does that to the candidates every time. Give John McCain credit, no question about it. He's been the most accessible candidate I have ever seen at the presidential level of politics. And he has made George W. Bush improve as a candidate by forcing him to get off of his pedestal and get down and mix it up by making New Hampshire a contest. But ultimately, I think the voters in New Hampshire are going to make Bush do that no matter what happened.
Okay. Taxes, Mark.
On taxes, Jim, I think that Paul has drawn the issue very classically for Republicans, and that's certainly been the truth in the past. McCain takes it and makes it, it's a character campaign. I mean, John McCain's story is a character story, and his campaign is a character campaign. Bill McInturff, his pollster, makes a very good point. He said, for the Republicans have lost 2 presidential elections in a row, got averaged less than 40% of the vote nationally, and what's the knock been on them? That is that we, the Republicans, are for the rich and indifferent to the little guy, and we're going to hurt grandma by our indifference or callousness on Social Security and Medicare. What McCain does is address this by saying, we're going to cut $150 billion in corporate welfare. These are sweetheart deals that have been cut by the Congress and the presidents of all administrations, and has led to other people, ordinary folks, on payroll taxes paying higher taxes. And then McCain turns around and makes the case that what we've done is given ourselves a party, run up this debt, and pass the bill on to our kids. So it's a different kind of argument. It isn't just cold showers and root canal work. It's a question of what kind of character we have as a people.
Now, some Republicans have put the rap on McCain that his argument sounds more like Democrats than Republicans, Paul.
Well, when you invoke the Citizens for Tax Justice as your source of intellectual argument, that's a labor-backed think tank here in Washington, which routinely denounces tax cuts for proposals for helping the rich. That's a classic Democratic argument. But there's one other issue of identification that Bush is trying to use tax cuts to identify, and that is the tax cuts put you on the side of smaller government. And that's been a classic Republican
I notice he
principle.
says that over and over again about
Don't take
money
it-
on the table, they'll spend it. Yeah.
That's right. And it also, I mean, John McCain has very skillfully portrayed himself as the outsider, as Mark says, as the anti-establishment character. The tax issue and the small government issue lets Bush come back and say, wait a minute, Senator McCain, you want to keep that money here in Washington, where you know, I mean, despite your best intentions, despite all the work you do in Congress to try to stop from spending it, it's spent anyway. And the best thing to do, keep it out of Washington in the first place.
Yeah. Horse race question, Mark. First, let's back up to Iowa. McCain is not running in the caucuses there, but what's your reading on that race and where it stands at this point?
Well, I think Iowa is a lot more like
That's January 24th, about 10 days
That's
away.
right, January
Sorry.
24th,
Okay.
that week from next
Right,
Monday.
right.
They will debate here tomorrow. McCain would have one hope, and that is that somehow the issue becomes national security and commander-in-chief. It's the one place where he enjoys an advantage over George W. Bush. But Governor Bush, as Ann Seltzer, the pollster for the Des Moines Register, told me this afternoon, he doesn't have any chinks in his armor here. He's well-liked, he's well-regarded. I think his support in this state matches his support among Republicans nationally. New Hampshire is fascinating. It's up for grabs. It's a real horse race. That is not the case in Iowa. Steve Forbes has made an all-out effort. He's got some very good people on the ground here. And the question is, will they turn up on caucus night and support his message of libertarian, almost as far as government is concerned, especially as far as taxes, economically libertarian, but at the same time quite traditional, even conservative on social matters.
How do you read the race in Iowa tonight?
It is similar. I mean, I think George Bush is very strong. There's no question about it. No Republican in Iowa has, in a contested big caucus, has ever gotten more than 37%. And the Forbes campaign would desperately love to keep George W. Bush below that number. It's going to be hard to do, but I think I followed Forbes around this week, and I was very impressed with his organization. He has thousands of volunteers out there, 4,000 captains in all 99 counties. I think he's going to do better than his polling suggests that he will. The question is, will he do well enough to make it look like, to cast some doubt on George W. Bush as a vote getter? Because remember, this is the first time George W. Bush is going to be tested as a vote getter outside of Texas. This is important for him. Meanwhile, George W. Bush wants to do so well that he blows away Forbes for good and then gets some momentum and a boost going into New Hampshire.
Now, Mark, the Democrats, Gore Bradley, what's your reading of that in Iowa?
Well, I think again Iowa is more like the nation, where the vice president has a big edge over Senator Bradley, and I think he has according to the Des Moines Register, among caucus goers, a 21-point margin, 54 to 33. They did a very tight screen in the polling parlance of people who do go to caucuses. And his people are confident. The Bradley people are spending a lot of time out here lowballing it, telling, gee, my goodness, gee, we'll be lucky if we get 11%. It reminds you of the old Frank Leahy, the Notre Dame football coach, who said, well, we'll be lucky if we make a first down this season, and his team went undefeated. Well, I don't know if Bradley's going to go undefeated here, but they're lowering expectations and hoping, again, to get a lift coming out of Iowa based upon a closer than expected outcome.
Paul, what's your reading of what the issue is in Iowa between Bradley and Gore? What's separating them? What's getting people interested, if anything?
I think it is Bill Bradley's attempt to separate himself on leadership. I mean, on actual issues like health care and some others, there aren't really great differences. There are differences in detail, there are differences in degree, but there aren't a lot of differences in kind. And what you see Bradley trying to do is to say, I really mean it. I plan to do it. And he's looking for some hooks to say, after 7 or 8 years of Dick Morris, small, incremental change, and poll-driven politics, I'm somebody who's going to tell you what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to lead and do it. And I think it's admirable in a way, because he's trying to say, I can lead, and I'm going to take some risks. Now, in good times, as we have, and Iowa is a pretty prosperous place, except on the farm, as well as the rest of the country, you have to pare away those Democratic voters and say, are you unhappy enough with the leadership you've gotten from this administration to do that? And he's having a harder time in Iowa because of the organization. This is the organized Democratic Party there. He's having a harder time doing that than he is in New Hampshire, where you have a much smaller union base and you have a lot more independence.
What would you add to that, Mark?
I would add, Jim, that Bill Bradley and Al Gore have copied their campaigns respectively from previous Republican playbooks. Al Gore's campaign, which is a quick hit, very attack mode, very aggressive, is like George Bush's 1988 campaign against Michael Dukakis, when he ran on issues like pollution of the Boston Harbor and the Pledge of Allegiance and Willie Horton, sort of keeping that tactical advantage, playing sort of a gotcha game, keeping your opponent very much on the defensive, and Gore has successfully kept Bradley on the defensive. Bradley, by contrast, has almost a Reagan-esque approach in the sense of a big picture, large ideas, and very specific about them, just as Reagan was. What is missing in the Bradley candidacy, I have to say, is an emotional connection, a sense of, we can do it as Americans. Let's move on. We've done this in the past. And I think, at no point do you hear what was said after Demosthenes spoke, let us march. I mean, it's not a question of being a great speaker. It's a question of making an emotional connection and enlisting your audience and your listeners to a project larger than themselves. And I think that's what John McCain, quite frankly, has been able to do on the Republican side, and Bill Bradley, up to now, has not been able to do on the Democratic side.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there for tonight. We still have many other opportunities to talk about this, but as you said earlier, Paul, at least the people are about to start voting soon.
And we'll stop talking.
All right. Thank you both very much. Finally tonight, another foreign correspondence. Our occasional conversations with reporters posted overseas with American news organizations. Margaret Warner has this one.
Our foreign correspondent is David Filippov, Moscow bureau chief for the Boston Globe. He spent considerable time in recent months covering the conflict in Chechnya. Welcome back, David.
Thanks for having me.
A lot of the TV footage, most of it out of Chechnya that we see, all focuses on the Russian soldiers. They're setting off artillery or whatever. We see very little, we had a little bit today earlier in the show, but very little of normal life, the Chechens, the countryside. What's it like there on the ground?
Well, if you're talking about the part of Chechnya that's occupied, that's controlled by the federal forces, the situation there is pretty bleak. There isn't that much of an economy. There's not much to do. It's very muddy. There hasn't been any commerce or really anything for anyone to do, any work. So really there's a lot of people standing around. Any place where there's been fighting, those villages are ruined, and very little has been done to put them, to repair them in any way. So the closer you get to the areas where there's been fighting, the worse things look. A lot of people standing around sort of wondering how to put their lives back together.
Now, you've also talked to Russian soldiers on the front a lot. How is their morale?
Well, the first few minutes of any conversation with Russian soldiers, usually the more senior they are as officers, the more they've been instructed to avoid saying things to journalists that might later on come back to haunt them. So they're often very optimistic, and they tell you that everything is under control, that we're confident, we know we have an army. The more you talk to Russian soldiers, and Russians like to talk, so sooner or later the more you start hearing...
And you speak Russian.
And I speak Russian, right. I speak Russian. My wife is Russian, so we speak Russian at home. The more you hear some of the other side of the story, they're a lot less confident about their ability to hold ground. They talk about attacks from the rear. They talk about the various problems they've run into in taking territory when the Chechens defended hard. The other thing is the less senior soldiers, draftees, privates. I mean, I ran into privates who were begging for food on the road. They'd stop a car, you stop thinking they want to see your document, and they say, do you have anything we can eat?
Really?
Other soldiers who signed contracts to sign up, and there's been a lot of talk about them and their effectiveness as a fighting force there. They were complaining about how their contract lasts until February, they want to go home.
Now, you seem to suggest that even though we get these glowing reports of their progress, that they don't have great control on the ground.
Well, the Russian force there obviously has been able to bash its way through two-thirds of Chechen territory, three-quarters of Chechen territory.
The northern part.
The northern part. But when they go through a town, if there's any resistance, they level it, and then they move on. If there's no resistance, they go through, make sure there's no fighters, rebel fighters, and then they move on. The parts that they've moved through are then empty, and you go through them later, and there's no Russian military presence, or maybe there's a couple of police standing on the outskirts checking documents, but that's it. So when they take territory, they don't necessarily hold it after that.
How hard is it as a journalist to cover the war there? You've been there a couple of times just recently.
Well, it's getting harder. There are a couple of problems. The first problem, at the beginning of the war, of course, there's been many kidnappings of foreigners, journalists included, and
by Chechens.
Well,
no,
I've never been kidnapped, so I can't say. The accusation is that it's Chechens, although Russian police officials have told me that there were also copycat kidnap groups that would kidnap people and then make it look like the Chechens did it. It became a big problem, a big black hole, a big area of lawlessness. But then once you get over your fear of kidnapping, then the next problem is how to get through Russian lines. Well, it's not as easy as it might look, but it's also not as difficult as it might look, because the Russians are notoriously incapable of controlling territory that they control. And then the third problem is getting around, and that's what ultimately did me in the last time I got there. When I got close to the front line, that was when the Russians said, "Hey, what are you doing here?"
So you were detained by Russian soldiers?
They held me up for a little while, and a couple of other people who were with me, and took us back to the main staging center in Mozdok and asked us a lot of questions about who we are. But basically, the point was, you're not supposed to be getting this close to the front line.
So you were quite close to Grozny at that point?
We were on the outskirts of Grozny, at the front, where the Russians were trying to advance and not really doing it because they couldn't break through the heavily defended Chechen lines.
Is it fair to say that the Russian government is actively discouraging journalists from covering the war there?
Well, they have an official line, which is that they don't think it's safe because of the kidnapping and because of the fighting. But then they have what they really are seeking, which is they'd like to control this. And they know that when Western journalists go there, for example, we tell a story that they don't want to be told. That makes perfect sense. All militaries try to control journalists. But there's another level, which is that they have gone out of their way, I think, in trying to censor the reports of Russian mainstream media who are reporting from the area. And so the Western journalists who do get through really make that effort look bad. And that's why I think they try hard to keep us out. A lot of people have been discouraged, and a lot of Russian journalists don't want to cover it because they're offended at the Chechens for the kidnappings. That they share the view of many Russians that it's not safe to be a Russian in Chechnya. So a lot of people just don't go on their own volition. There's a combination of things.
Has the Russian public, though, been getting a sanitized view of, say, the number of casualties and how the war is going? Or does it depend on what media you're looking at?
If you're living outside of Moscow, St. Petersburg, and all you do is watch television for your news, then you're getting a very sanitized view. The further you get, there are two major state-run, Kremlin-influenced state television stations that are seen all across the country. And those are showing the view that the military and that the government would like people to see. If you're in Moscow, there are a lot of alternative sources for media. A lot of print media have been writing pretty much the same way that the Western media has been writing from the beginning of the war. You see stories about how the media coverage is slowly getting more anti-war. In fact, there have been a lot of print publications that have been covering the war rather fairly, objectively, since the very beginning. But they don't have a lot of influence outside the big cities.
But how do you explain that the polls, if they are to be believed, show that at least up to now the Russian public seems to be gung-ho about this war and about Vladimir Putin, the new president, for the way he's been handling it?
You have to go back to the causes of the war, or at least the official reason for the war was a series of apartment bombings in Moscow and other cities that the Russian government very quickly blamed on Chechen rebels. Although there's never been any proof. Now recently they brought out a videotape saying this is proof that the Chechens were making bombs to bomb apartments. There's never been the kind of conclusive proof that would make you want to completely back that reason. Nonetheless, most Russians think that, yes, we have to do away with this. The Chechens have been de facto independent for 3 years since the last war there, and we have to put an end to this.
Do you think, though, that that support is strong enough to withstand if there are reports of greater casualties over the coming weeks?
This is the big question. I don't think that anything that happened in Chechnya, unless it's an inconceivably big disaster for the Russian army, can stop Putin from being elected in March 26th elections. But after that, he'll be the new president with a real serious and long-term problem on his hands. Then the popular support for this thing will slowly erode.
All right, David, thanks very much. We'll have you back.
Thanks for having me.
Again, the major stories of this Friday. The U.S. Supreme Court agreed to consider whether states may outlaw what opponents call partial birth abortion. The court also agreed to decide whether the Boy Scouts may exclude gays as troop leaders. And thousands of Cuban mothers marched in Havana. They demanded the return of 60-year-old Elian Gonzalez. We'll see you online and again here Monday evening. Have a nice weekend. I'm Jim Lehrer. Thank you and good night.
The soybean, rich in proteins. With it, we can feed more people with the same amount of land. Who is committed to this nutritional source that is helping to feed the world?
Helping serious investors relax, knowing their investments are truly diversified. See how we earn it. Solomon Smith Barney.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This program was also made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Join us on OPB Radio Monday for All Things Considered, when we'll continue with NPR's picks of the top 100 musical works of the 20th century. That's Monday at 5 on OPB Radio.
Video cassettes of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS.
Funding for local broadcast of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by viewers like you. And by the following. The Collins Foundation. The Collins Foundation is dedicated to improving the quality of life in Oregon. OHSU, where healing, teaching, and discovery come together.
It has happened again. Death by gunfire at another school in the United States.
7 school shootings in 2 years.
The boy jumped onto a table and opened fire.
The more we hear, the more we ask, why?
The boy was 15. It was in the school cafeteria.
Frontline takes you inside the mind of one schoolyard killer.
His name is Kipling Keeple.
Watch Frontline.
Tuesday night at 9. A local panel on youth violence follows at 10:30.
On March 24th, 1989, the unthinkable happened in Prince William Sound, Alaska. It was the worst oil spill in U.S. history.
Try and picture a place that you care about and then think of it with several feet of oil dumped on top of it.
Restoring Alaska, 10 years in the wake of Exxon Valdez, explores the legacy of this disaster and efforts to see that it never happens again.
On OPB, Monday at 10. Funding for this evening's programming on OPB has been provided by viewers like you and by Carson Oil Company, dedicated to serving Oregonians with Chevron lubricants to contractors, service stations, industry, and farms.